The morning of March 23, 1945, in a cramped workshop at the Nakajima Aircraft Company facility on Ota, the engineers gathered around a crate that had been shipped in secrecy from the battlefield. Inside lay the prize, a single B-29 engine, recovered from a downed bomber over China. The engine's size alone stunned them. Each cylinder, polished and perfect, gleamed even under the dim overhead lights. Tubes, pipes, and complex assemblies sprawled outward like the skeleton of some impossible machine. Lieutenant Fumio Nia, an engineering officer assigned to the evaluation team, ran his gloved hand along the smooth crankcase, noting the uniformity of the rivets, the precision of the casting. This cannot be," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Around him, senior metallurgists exchanged glances that said exactly the same thing. The Americans had produced something that surpassed Japanese engineering by nearly a decade. Before we jump back tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For years, Japanese propaganda had assured the engineers and pilots alike that their aircraft, their Nakajima Key series, the Mitsubishi Zero variants, and the latest prototypes, were competitive with anything the Allies could field. Workshops were filled with slogans about ingenuity, perseverance, and the honor of crafting weapons worthy of the Emperor. Every component, from the tiniest rivet to the most complex supercharger, had been scrutinized under the ideology that Japan's technological edge, combined with daring pilots, could hold the Pacific. And yet, before them now, sat a machine that challenged every assumption. The team had been briefed with meticulous secrecy. Intelligence officers had recovered the B-29 engine from a bomber crash in southern China, where American airmen had conducted a raid on a supply depot supporting the Japanese advance. Its size alone was intimidating. The R3350 duplex cylinder radial engine spanned nearly 6 feet across, each cylinder equipped with a General Electric turbo supercharger, a device that would maintain sea-level power at altitudes approaching 32,000 feet. Nia had seen superchargers before, on Nakajima designs and experimental prototypes, but nothing that approached the engineering audacity of what now rested before him. Every component seemed calibrated to the thousandth of an inch, from the turbine blades forged in superalloys to the precision ball bearings capable of withstanding temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. Even the simplest observations unnerved the team. The turbocharger housings, mounted directly on the exhaust manifold, were seamless, perfectly balanced, and far smaller than any Japanese equivalents. Metallurgists whispered about the alloys used tungsten-enriched steel and heat-resistant, coatings that their own factories could only dream of producing in meaningful quantities. Engineers carefully rotated the crankshaft by hand, marveling at the smooth resistance, the mechanical harmony. In Nakajima workshops, they were accustomed to minor vibrations, uneven castings, and tolerances that required careful assembly. Here, every motion was precise, every fit exact, and yet it functioned. A machine of this caliber, they realized, could be mass-produced reliably, a concept that had eluded Japanese industry for years. The implications were immediate and profound. Japanese doctrine had long emphasized the skill of the pilot over technological sophistication. It was a belief reinforced in training manuals and factory propaganda alike. Superior Japanese aeronautical skill could offset any numerical or mechanical advantage. Yet the engine before them suggested a stark inversion. With pressurized cabins, reliable turbochargers, and engines capable of producing more than 2,000 horsepower at extreme altitudes, B-29 crews could operate far above the reach of conventional Japanese interceptors. Pilots trained in the Nakajima Ki 87 or Kawasaki Ki 45 would be scrambling toward aircraft already beyond their operational envelope. The psychological weight of this revelation hung in the air heavier than any superheated alloy. In workshops across Japan, engineers were already grappling with material shortages and the limitations of wartime production. High-grade alloys were prioritized for the few experimental engines that might reach operational testing, while mass production models relied on softer, less heat-resistant steels. The B-29 engine, in contrast, seemed to have been conceived with the assumption that material constraints were irrelevant. Thousands of units, each identical, each reliable, and each capable of operating at the very edge of human engineering. Lieutenant Nia and his colleagues understood that this was not just a technical gap, it was an industrial chasm. Even with the best engineers and the finest machinists, Japanese factories could not hope to replicate what General Electric had achieved in New York. Over the next several days, the team began disassembling the engine systematically. Each stage revealed new lessons in mechanical ingenuity. The dual turbochargers, mounted side by side, were not merely functional. They were optimized to work in tandem, drawing exhaust energy efficiently and compressing intake air with minimal loss. Bearings and shaft tolerances were such that turbines spun at over 20,000 revolutions per minute without vibration. Lubrication channels were routed to ensure consistent flow even under extreme thermal expansion. Nia scribbled notes furiously in his engineering journal, recognizing patterns of design philosophy that emphasized modularity, reliability, and ease of replacement principles that Japanese design engineers had only implemented inconsistently in experimental models. The human response to the engine was as significant as the mechanical one. Among the engineers, whispers of disbelief became quiet debates, then outright discussions about the future of aerial warfare. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi, a senior test pilot temporarily reassigned to the workshop for technical consultation, remarked, "If they can fly this to 30,000 feet, our best fighters will never reach them, and they will not need to." It was an admission that challenged the very foundation of Japanese aerial strategy, the assumption that tactical skill, combined with moderate technological advancement, could equal or surpass American industrial output. Here was evidence that the war had entered a phase where ingenuity alone could not compensate for the sheer scale and precision of enemy engineering. By the end of the week, the Nakajima engineers had catalogued every component, measured every tolerance, and debated every material choice. They compiled reports for higher headquarters, noting with stark clarity the technical superiority and potential battlefield consequences of the B-29 engine. They documented its capacity for sustained high-altitude flight, its reliability under extreme conditions, and its compatibility with pressurized aircraft cabins. Every line of the report carried an undercurrent of unease. Japan's current and planned aircraft would be virtually impotent against bombers powered by such engines. Even the most optimistic projections for Nakajima's own turbocharger programs were years away from achieving similar performance. The phrase that echoed through Nia's notes captured the collective realization 10 years ahead. For the next 2 weeks, the Nakajima engineers worked in near secrecy, examining every aspect of the B-29 engine. They rotated the crankshaft by hand, noting the minimal friction in the connecting rods. They carefully disassembled the dual General Electric turbochargers, observing the precise curvature of the turbine blades and the flawless machining of the compressor housings. Each discovery reinforced a bitter truth. This was not merely a superior engine, it was a glimpse into a future of aviation technology that Japanese industry could not hope to reach under current conditions. Lieutenant Nia recorded his observations meticulously. "The tolerances alone," he wrote, "are beyond anything our factories have produced. Bearings are matched to thousandths of an inch, turbo blades balanced to imperceptible vibration, lubrication channels routed with intelligence. This is industrial precision elevated to an art form." Senior metallurgist Kenji Yamamoto conducted chemical analyses of the superalloys used in the turbine wheels. He had seen heat-resistant steels in experimental Nakajima engines, but none could withstand the operating temperatures implied by the B-29 design. Exhaust gases in the GE turbochargers would exceed 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, spinning at over 20,000 revolutions per minute. A single flaw in the metal could trigger catastrophic failure. Japanese production methods, constrained by wartime shortages, simply could not achieve the purity and uniformity required. The engineers also observed a level of modularity in the design that was unfamiliar to them. Every major component, cylinders, turbochargers, fuel injectors, and ignition systems, was engineered for easy replacement and precise alignment. Nia noted that American designers had anticipated operational wear and maintenance at scale. In contrast, Japanese experimental engines often required careful, hand-fitted assembly, with tolerances that could vary from one unit to the next. Even if they attempted to copy the engine, they could not hope to achieve the consistency needed for mass production. Testing the engine, however, was impossible. The captured unit was incomplete and partially damaged, and the facility lacked the resources to fire it fully without risking destruction. Instead, engineers constructed detailed calculations, using formulas to estimate power output at various altitudes. By simulating performance at 25,000, 30,000, and 32,000 feet, they confirmed what their intuition already suggested. The B-29 engine could maintain over 2,000 horsepower at altitudes where Japanese fighters began to falter. This realization struck a chord among the engineers. For years, they had been confident in the Ki-87's projected performance as a high-altitude interceptor. The aircraft's experimental turbocharged engine promised speed and power above 28,000 feet, potentially enabling attacks on B-29 formations. But the captured GE engine revealed the limitations of Japanese metallurgy, manufacturing, and mass production. Even if the Ki-87 reached operational status, it would remain a fragile, rare aircraft, unable to match the Americans' operational reliability or numbers. The psychological impact was equally profound. In the weeks following the engine's arrival, debate in the workshop shifted from technical curiosity to strategic despair. Some engineers argued that Japanese ingenuity could eventually catch up. Others, more seasoned, warned that industrial limitations made this impossible. Lieutenant Nia reflected in his journal, "We can understand their engineering, we can replicate their concepts in theory, but the scale, the reliability, the precision they have built a system, and we cannot match it." Captain Hiroshi Takahashi was particularly vocal in these discussions. A test pilot and former combat aviator, he understood the human limits of Japanese crews. "Even if we could produce engines like this," he said, "our pilots will never see them in meaningful numbers, and by the time we do, the Americans will have replaced their losses tenfold." The quiet hum of machinery and the smell of oil and metal in the workshop made the words sting with reality. The war was shifting in ways that few officers had fully grasped. The Nakajima engineers also began comparing the captured engine to their own turbocharger projects. In 1941, Japanese designers had studied early American supercharger concepts, attempting to replicate the principle of compressing intake air with exhaust-driven turbines. Some prototypes, such as the Nakajima Ha-219 experimental engines, incorporated rudimentary turbochargers. Yet 3 years later, in 1944, production units remained unreliable. Turbines failed under heat stress, bearings seized, and precision machining was inconsistent. By contrast, the B-29 engine combined advanced metallurgy, automated testing, and industrial standardization to achieve reliability that Japan could not match. In these evaluations, the engineers began to recognize a subtle, profound irony. The Americans were winning not because of superior skill in design alone, but because they had built a system, a combination of metallurgy, mass production, quality control, and logistical foresight that amplified the effectiveness of individual engineers and pilots. Japanese propaganda had long emphasized individual brilliance, the bushido of engineers and pilots, the skill and courage of the individual in overcoming limitations. Yet the captured engine demonstrated that in modern warfare, human ingenuity alone was insufficient. Without the backing of industrial capacity and systemic precision, even the most brilliant design could falter. By early April 1945, reports reached the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Lieutenant Nia and his colleagues presented detailed findings. The captured B-29 engine was 10 years ahead of Japanese turbocharged radial engines in power, reliability, and operational altitude capability. They cautioned that without significant industrial investment, far beyond the country's capacity in wartime, the current generation of Japanese fighters would be incapable of intercepting B-29 formations at operational altitudes. Higher command, however, was unwilling to fully internalize the implications. Officers repeatedly asked for solutions. Can you replicate it? Can we produce 10 engines per month? 100? The engineers answered honestly. No. Material shortages, inadequate machining precision, and limited metallurgical expertise made mass production impossible. Yet, even as they spoke, American B-29 raids continued to devastate industrial targets in Kyushu, Honshu, and the Marianas, demonstrating that the theoretical limits they had calculated were already being realized in practice. One day, Lieutenant Nia received a memorandum from Colonel Takushiro Hattori, an operations officer with direct experience analyzing captured American aircraft components. Hattori's words were careful, almost clinical. The operational performance of American heavy bombers exceeds expectations. Our evaluations of captured engines confirm that their technology is not merely advanced, it is beyond the current capabilities of our factories to reproduce reliably. Countermeasures, at this stage, are limited to tactical adaptation rather than technological parity. Nia underlined the word beyond repeatedly. There was no room for optimism. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The engineers attempted minor experiments. They tried substituting domestic steel alloys in mock-up turbine blades, testing them under simulated exhaust temperatures. The results were catastrophic. Warping, cracking, and bearing failure occurred within minutes. Attempts to fabricate smaller-scale turbochargers revealed the same pattern. Conceptually, they understood the principles hot exhaust driving a turbine to compress intake air, but translating that knowledge into a functional, mass-producible engine was beyond their industrial reach. This stark realization marked a psychological turning point. Engineers who had once approached American designs with curiosity and competitive spirit now faced something closer to awe and despair. Nia wrote in his journal, "It is not that we lack skill, it is that we lack the environment in which skill can manifest on a scale required by modern warfare. They have built not only machines, but a system to maintain those machines. We have nothing comparable." The consequences were evident in subsequent Japanese planning. Proposals for high-altitude interceptors were delayed or cancelled as production bottlenecks became insurmountable. The Nakajima Ki-87, intended as a turbocharged fighter capable of engaging B-29 seconds at 30,000 feet, faced continual setbacks. Only a handful of prototypes were ever completed. The Mitsubishi J-8M rocket interceptor, designed for short bursts of extreme altitude speed, suffered from operational impracticalities, dangerously volatile fuel, short endurance, and minimal payload. Even if technically impressive, these aircraft could not replace the systemic advantage demonstrated by the Americans. Meanwhile, the B-29 seconds continued their high-altitude campaigns. From bases in the Marianas, Guam, and Tinian, American bombers struck industrial centers with impunity. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to operate efficiently at 30,000 feet and above, while Japanese interceptors struggled with insufficient oxygen systems, frozen gun barrels, and engines choking on thin air. The captured engine had provided Japanese engineers with a glimpse of the inevitable, a war increasingly dictated by industrial scale, reliability, and technological foresight, rather than individual heroism or incremental innovation. By mid-April 1945, the Nakajima team had submitted their final report. It was a document of sobering clarity, cataloguing every component, material, and potential implication. Summary was concise. The B-29's R-3350 engine represented a technological lead of nearly a decade, and Japanese attempts to match it were constrained not by imagination, but by production capabilities. The engineers' reflections were equally candid. We have observed a machine of unprecedented precision and reliability. Replication at scale is beyond current national capacity. Operationally, the consequences are unavoidable. For the engineers, this marked the end of a certain kind of belief, the conviction that human ingenuity alone could overcome material limitations. In its place arose a deeper understanding of industrial warfare, that technology, production, and logistics could decisively shape outcomes even before a single pilot took to the sky. The captured engine was not just a piece of machinery, it was a mirror, reflecting the widening gap between ambition and capacity, between doctrine and reality, and between the ideals of war and the unyielding constraints of keeper engineering. By late April 1945, the implications of the captured B-29 engine had begun to ripple beyond the Nakajima workshops. Intelligence reports confirmed that American bombers were flying with growing impunity over Japan, striking industrial and military targets with increasing efficiency. Factories in Kyushu and Honshu were no longer merely under threat. They were being systematically degraded, their output curtailed despite desperate Japanese efforts at camouflage, dispersal, and nighttime operations. Engineers who had examined the engine recognized that their calculations matched reality. The technological gap they had documented was now manifest in the sky. Operational planning within the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service grew increasingly fraught. The Ki-87, envisioned as a high-altitude interceptor capable of challenging B-29 formations, faced repeated delays. Prototypes were few and plagued with mechanical failures. Turbochargers designed in-house could not endure sustained high-altitude flight. The project's ambitious goals, speed, firepower, operational ceiling, were conceptually sound but impossible to achieve reliably under wartime constraints. Even if a handful of aircraft could reach operational readiness, they would be too scarce to have any strategic impact. Meanwhile, the American bombing campaign pressed forward relentlessly. Crews trained in Tinian, Saipan, and Guam leveraged the full advantage of the R-3350 engine's power, exploiting altitudes and speeds that Japanese fighters could not match. Pilots benefited from pressurized cabins and heated compartments, mitigating the extreme cold and hypoxia that would have incapacitated a Japanese aircrew at 30,000 feet. Gun barrels that could freeze in Japanese aircraft remained functional, as did ammunition belts. B-29 formations maintained cruising speeds of over 300 miles per hour at altitudes approaching 32,000 feet, all while delivering precise bomb loads to targets previously thought safe. The Nakajima engineers, observing these raids from reports and photographs, were confronted with the stark reality of their work's implications. Their calculations of horsepower, turbocharger efficiency, and pressurized cabin performance were not abstract exercises. They predicted the outcome of battles in real time. Lieutenant Nia noted in his journal, "What we observed on the bench is now unfolding above our cities. Every calculation, every test, every tolerance measured, predicts the effectiveness of an aircraft we cannot hope to counter. This is the moment theory meets reality." Efforts to develop countermeasures were largely reactive. Japanese pilots experimented with interception tactics, climbing to the limit of their aircraft's operational ceilings, only to find engines faltering, oxygen supplies inadequate, and gunnery ineffective at extreme altitudes. High-altitude formations were attempted with Ki 45 seconds and Ki 87 seconds, but mechanical failure and pilot exhaustion were frequent. Even when engagements succeeded in damaging a B-29, the cost in aircraft and experienced pilots was disproportionate. Losses were irreplaceable. Replacements were not available. The engineers' warnings had been accurate. The technological and industrial superiority of the Americans rendered Japanese responses largely symbolic rather than operationally effective. In the workshops, the captured engine remained a silent teacher. Engineers continued to document every detail, creating detailed diagrams, stress analyses, and component charts. They theorized improvements to their own designs, but implementation was constrained by resource scarcity and the limited skill pool of machinists, capable of achieving the required tolerances. The realization that industrial capacity dictated the limits of technological ambition became deeply ingrained. Even the most brilliant designs could not compensate for deficits in raw materials, machining precision, or systematic quality control. One particularly sobering moment occurred during an internal demonstration for senior officers. Lieutenant Nia's team recreated the expected performance curves of the R3350 engine at various altitudes, showing sustained power output far beyond Japanese prototypes. The officers, many of whom had previously relied on doctrine emphasizing pilot skill and ingenuity over industrial capability, were visibly shaken. Colonel Takushiro Hattori, present during the demonstration, reportedly remarked, "We are not merely behind in design, we are behind in the very system required to make design work." The statement captured the essence of the engineers' growing awareness. The war was no longer simply a contest of pilots, tactics, or individual machines. It was a contest of systems, logistics, and scalable technology. By May 1945, reports from operational theaters confirmed that B-29 raids were degrading Japanese war production with unprecedented efficiency. Aircraft assembly lines, engine factories, and munitions plants were increasingly targeted, often at night, using high-altitude approaches previously impossible for conventional Japanese fighters. Even the most innovative tactical ideas from Japanese pilots were insufficient to counter the technological and operational gap. The captured engine had foreshadowed this reality. The Americans' industrial, technological, and logistical systems provided a decisive advantage that no single aircraft, pilot, or innovation could offset. In reflecting on the captured engine, Lieutenant Nia later wrote, "This machine was more than an engine. It was a statement of the scale of modern war, a warning that human ingenuity without the foundation of industrial capacity is insufficient." In its precision, reliability, and foresight, it demonstrated the true nature of power in the skies, not bravery alone, but the combination of skill, system, production. The words conveyed both admiration and despair, capturing the psychological shift experienced by Japanese engineers. The legacy of this realization extended beyond the immediate technical implications. Japanese aircraft development became increasingly conservative, focusing on projects feasible within material and industrial constraints rather than chasing technological parity with the Americans. Experimental designs were abandoned or shelved. Resources were redirected to defending territory and producing incremental improvements to existing models. The Nakajima Ki-87, the Tachikawa Ki-94, and the Mitsubishi J-8M became symbols of ambition constrained by reality. The captured B-29 engine, once a source of intense curiosity, had become a benchmark against which all future Japanese designs would be measured and found wanting. On a broader scale, the incident highlighted the decisive role of industrialized warfare in the Pacific theater. While individual skill, bravery, and innovation were celebrated in manuals and propaganda, the practical reality was that the scale, reliability, and precision of production often determined outcomes before a single battle was fought. The B-29 program exemplified this. Tens of thousands of engineers, machinists, and assembly workers coordinated across multiple factories had created an aircraft capable of sustained operations at altitudes beyond the reach of Japanese interceptors. The captured engine was a microcosm of this systemic advantage, revealing the profound discrepancy between aspiration and capability. Even after the war, the psychological imprint of encountering the R3350 engine lingered. Engineers like Lieutenant Nia reflected on the experience as a pivotal moment of professional and historical clarity. In interviews decades later, he described the captured engine as a glimpse into the future of aviation, 10 years ahead of our capacity to realize it. It forced us to confront the limitations of our industry, our logistics, and, ultimately, our war effort. Such reflections underscore the human dimension of technological evaluation. The encounter was not merely mechanical, but profoundly emotional, challenging pride, doctrine, and the belief that skill alone could bridge material gaps. For historians, the captured B-29 engine offers a lens through which to understand the larger dynamics of the Pacific War. It exemplifies the intersection of human ingenuity, industrial capacity, and operational consequence. The psychological shift experienced by Japanese engineers mirrored the operational reality in the skies. Superior technology, when coupled with industrial scalability and systemic planning, could dominate battlefields regardless of individual valor. In the final analysis, the story of the engine is not simply a tale of mechanical marvel, it is a reflection on the nature of warfare in the modern age. Lieutenant Nia and his colleagues had witnessed, firsthand, the interplay between invention and production, between skill and scale, and between belief and reality. The R3350 engine represented more than an American technological lead. It symbolized a fundamental truth. In the crucible of global conflict, systems and processes could amplify the impact of human skill far beyond what any individual or doctrine could achieve. As the war drew toward its conclusion, Japanese engineers returned to their workshops with a tempered perspective. The captured engine remained a reference point, a testament to industrial foresight and precision. It was a reminder of what had been achieved, and a measure of what could not be matched under the constraints of a nation under siege. The irony was undeniable. The very machine that would contribute to the destruction of their factories, cities, and ultimately their capacity to wage war, had been for a brief moment a source of professional awe and admiration. In the end, the B-29 engine captured in southern China was more than a mechanical artifact. It was a mirror reflecting the chasm between aspiration and capacity, a lesson in the decisive role of industrialized technology, and a profound psychological turning point for those who confronted it. For the engineers who studied it, it would remain a symbol of both admiration and inevitability, a tangible reminder that in modern war, brilliance alone is insufficient, and that scale, precision, and systemic design often determine the course of history long before the first shot is fired. The weeks and months following the analysis of the captured B-29 engine left an indelible mark on the Nakajima engineers and the broader Japanese aviation community. By the spring of 1945, the reality of the industrial and technological gap between Japan and the United States had become impossible to ignore. The engineers' initial fascination with the R3350 engine had evolved into a sober acknowledgement. This was not merely a machine of extraordinary design, it was a statement of industrial power, foresight, and systemic efficiency that Japan could not hope to replicate under wartime conditions. Lieutenant Fumio Nia, once filled with cautious optimism about Japan's experimental turbocharged designs, now approached his work with tempered realism. He continued to oversee development on remaining high-altitude interceptor prototypes, yet every decision carried the unspoken weight of comparison. Each key 87 airframe examined, each experimental turbocharger disassembled, became a measure against the captured engine. The contrast was stark. While Japanese designs suffered from material inconsistencies, frequent mechanical failures, and limited production capability, the B-29 engine embodied reliability, standardization, and scalability. Nia often reflected privately that the Americans had created a system in which individual skill was amplified by industrial discipline, a concept that Japanese engineers had long acknowledged, but never fully achieved. For the engineers, the psychological dimension of this realization was profound. In the past, propaganda and internal doctrine had reinforced a belief in the superiority of Japanese ingenuity and the decisive value of individual skill. Manuals celebrated pilots' daring maneuvers and the precision of aircraft assembly conducted by hand. Now, confronted with tangible evidence of industrial parity, or rather, industrial supremacy, they were forced to reconsider not only their technical assumptions, but also the philosophical underpinnings of their profession. Lieutenant Nia recorded in his journal, "The B-29 engine is a mirror. It reflects not our failure, but the scale of modern warfare. The individual, however brilliant, cannot overcome a system designed to amplify skill, reliability, and production capacity." This recognition influenced not only the engineers' technical assessments, but also their approach to operational planning. By late spring, Japanese High Command was desperate to devise countermeasures against the increasingly devastating B-29 raids. Proposals included accelerated development of the Ki-87, experimental rocket-assisted interceptors like the Mitsubishi J-8M, and improved anti-aircraft artillery. Yet the Nakajima team knew, from detailed measurements and calculations, that these efforts could only mitigate, never neutralize, the advantage conferred by the B-29's engine. Even if a handful of prototypes succeeded in reaching operational altitude, they would be too few, too fragile, and too late to influence the strategic balance. The engineers also began to reflect on the broader implications of their discovery. It became clear that modern warfare was no longer solely a contest of skill, courage, or ingenuity. It was a contest of systems industrial, logistical, and technological capable of producing machines that could outperform, outlast, and outnumber human operators. The R3350 engine, in its complexity and FAP precision, symbolized this shift. Its impact extended far beyond its immediate battlefield applications. It represented a paradigm in which success was determined by an integrated chain of design, production, maintenance, and operational planning. Amid these reflections, a sense of professional awe persisted. Despite the sobering implications for the war, the engineers could not help but admire the ingenuity embedded in every component of the engine. Turbocharger housings, forged with heat-resistant alloys, allowed the aircraft to maintain maximum power at altitudes beyond 30,000 feet. Precision bearings and perfectly balanced turbine blades enabled continuous operation at extreme rotational speeds. Lubrication channels were engineered to sustain performance under thermal expansion, while every component demonstrated modularity, reliability, and ease of maintenance. Each detail conveyed a lesson in industrial engineering, a benchmark of excellence that Japanese engineers could study but not fully emulate under wartime conditions. Captain Hiroshi Takahashi, who had observed the engine firsthand, often reflected on the human dimensions of this technological marvel. In his reports, he noted that the engine's existence forced Japanese planners to confront a stark reality. The effectiveness of American high-altitude bombing was not merely a function of pilot skill or luck, but the cumulative result of industrial foresight, systemic design, and precision engineering. "We face a foe," he wrote, "whose strength lies not only in their pilots or aircraft, but in the invisible scaffolding of production, quality, and reliability that supports every mission." This realization had lasting effects on Japanese aviation philosophy. The engineers increasingly prioritized achievable production and reliability over ambitious, high-risk innovations. Resources were redirected toward incremental improvements and defensive operations, reflecting an acknowledgement of practical limits. The captured engine, once a source of fascination, had become a touchstone for industrial realism, a constant reminder that technological ambition without systemic support could not alter the course of modern warfare. The captured B-29 engine also left a deeper historical imprint. For historians and military analysts, it provides a microcosm of the industrial asymmetry that shaped the Pacific War. Whereas Japanese strategy had emphasized individual skill, tactical ingenuity, and the valor of pilots and engineers, the Americans had demonstrated that sustained industrial output, rigorous quality control, and systemic planning could decisively influence outcomes. The engine became a symbol of this reality, illustrating the extent to which operational success was predicated not solely on human decision-making, but on the infrastructure and processes that enabled human skill to be applied consistently at scale. Lieutenant Nia and his colleagues continued to document their observations long after the initial analysis. Detailed diagrams, material assessments, and component specifications were compiled into reports for military archives. These documents emphasized both the technical superiority of the B-29 engine and the industrial context in which it had been produced. In retrospect, Nia wrote, "We were witnessing the embodiment of an industrial vision, where foresight, precision, and systemic discipline created a weapon whose operational consequences were inevitable. It forced a reckoning not just of machines, but of the philosophy of war itself. Even amid the destruction wrought by B-29 raids, the engineers could not help but feel a measure of professional admiration. The R3350 engine represented a synthesis of ingenuity, precision, and industrial discipline, a benchmark for any engineer, regardless of national allegiance. In some ways, it became a teacher, providing lessons in metallurgy, tolerances, and systemic design that would influence post-war aviation and industrial engineering in Japan for decades. Yet the admiration was tempered by bitter reality. The captured engine had illuminated a fundamental limitation. No matter the brilliance of Japanese engineers or pilots, their nation lacked the industrial foundation to achieve parity. This truth shaped not only the immediate tactical and strategic response, but also the broader psychological landscape of Japan's wartime leadership. Engineers, officers, and planners were forced to accept that the war had reached a stage where technology, production capacity, and systemic execution determined outcomes with greater certainty than doctrine, courage, or improvisation. By the summer of 1945, the captured B-29 engine had transcended its physical form. It had become a symbol of industrial inevitability, a lens through which Japanese engineers assessed both their work and their limitations. It revealed that modern warfare was no longer a contest of isolated skill, but of interconnected systems, where design, production, logistics, and operational planning converged to produce decisive effects. The engine's precision, reliability, and foresight encapsulated the lessons of the Pacific War. That technology and industrial capacity could preordain outcomes long before individual actors engaged in battle. For Lieutenant Nia, the experience remained a defining moment of his professional life. In post-war interviews, he described the engine as a teacher in steel, a testament to human foresight elevated by systemic discipline. It forced us to confront not only our limitations, but the evolving nature of warfare itself. This reflection underscores the human dimension of technological encounters, beyond specifications, tolerances, and performance charts. The engine provoked a profound psychological reckoning. It challenged assumptions, disrupted confidence, and reoriented priorities in ways that would resonate well beyond the immediate theatre of conflict. The final chapter of this story is thus one of reflection and acknowledgement. The B-29 engine captured in southern China was more than a mechanical artifact. It was a catalyst for understanding the decisive role of industrialized warfare. It revealed the gap between ambition and capability, between doctrine and reality, and between human skill and systemic execution. For Japanese engineers, it became both a source of admiration and a sobering measure of limitation, a machine that taught as much about their own constraints as it did about American ingenuity. In the end, the engine's legacy extended far beyond the war. It provided insights into the relationship between technology, production, and operational effect, lessons that influenced post-war aviation development in Japan and informed historical understanding of the Pacific War. Its story serves as a reminder that in modern conflict, brilliance alone is insufficient. Success is determined by the interplay of design, industrial capacity, and execution, a lesson made manifest in steel, turbines, and the meticulous engineering of a single captured engine. As history would show, the captured B-29 engine symbolized a turning point not only in the Pacific conflict, but in the understanding of warfare itself. It illustrated that mastery of technology requires not only ingenuity, but the industrial framework to sustain it. And for the engineers who confronted it, it was a moment of profound insight, that the future of war is shaped as much by factories, tolerances, and processes as by courage, skill, or doctrine. In this revelation, the captured engine stood as both teacher and witness, a testament to the enduring truth that in the crucible of global conflict, systems can amplify human endeavor to a scale that no individual can match. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.